Hello, my name is Maya. I showed up unannounced after years of working, years of sending money, never missing a call when they needed something. But when I came home, no one was there, no lights, no voices, just silence. And my father, abandoned in a hospital, on life support, while my mother and siblings were sipping cocktails in Bali. So I did the only thing I had left. I froze the bank account. Within an hour, chaos hit, but that was just the beginning. What kind of family does that to someone they say they love? The cab slowed as we turned into the neighborhood, a pocket of old Sacramento that hadn't changed in years. My childhood street still had that quiet stillness about it, sidewalks with hairline cracks, porches with rocking chairs that barely moved, and front yards full of stories no one told anymore. As we passed the corner house where Mrs. Green used to water her garden in a bathrobe, something in my chest tightened. That garden was gone now. Just gravel and a plastic flamingo. I looked down at the small gift bag on my lap, the edges already worn from the flight. Inside was a cash envelope and a bottle of my dad's favorite cologne. I'd wrapped it myself, late one night after a double shift in Seattle, imagining his face when I surprised him. "Here, okay?" the driver asked, pulling up to the house. "Yeah, here's good," I murmured, reaching for my wallet. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the years, or maybe just the absence of warmth. There were no lights, no wreath on the door, no smell of cinnamon or slow-cooked pork from the kitchen, just silence and still air. I stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath my boots, and stood staring at the front steps that once held late-night chats with Dad or long goodbyes when I left for college. The porch light didn't flicker on. I rang the bell. Waited. Knocked. No answer. I checked my phone. 2 bars. Tried calling Mom. Straight to voicemail. I called Cassian. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. My fingers hovered over the keypad. Maybe they were asleep, out for groceries, a walk. But something about the stillness wasn't right. The kind of still that doesn't just mean absence, it means abandonment. I stepped back to the sidewalk, trying to breathe. Across the street, a woman pushing a stroller waved. Her face lit up as she crossed toward me. "Hey, Maya?" Her voice tilted up with polite curiosity. "Wow, long time. Thought you moved to New York or something?" "Seattle," I corrected gently, trying to recall her name. She smiled. Right. Your mom said you hadn't been back in years." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "They're not home, though," she added, adjusting her scarf. "Left a few days ago. Your mom said they were headed to Bali. Figured you'd gone with them." I blinked. "Bali?" "Yeah, big family Christmas trip. Said they needed a break." She tilted her head. "Wait, you didn't know?" My stomach dropped, but I managed a tight smile. "I guess not." The woman looked uneasy now, realizing something wasn't adding up. Also, I hope it's nothing serious, but your dad, he's been in the hospital, right? The ambulance came like 2 weeks ago. Thought you knew." She trailed off, her voice caught between concern and confusion. I swallowed hard. "Hospital? Which one?" She frowned, thinking. "County General, I think. He collapsed in the yard. Paramedics said it was his heart. I assumed someone told you." "Yeah, thanks," I murmured. She gave me a half-apologetic smile, adjusted her stroller, and walked on. I stood there for a few moments longer, the winter breeze sneaking down the collar of my coat, but the chill had already settled somewhere deeper. Without another word, I turned, walked back to the cab, and opened the door. "Back to the airport?" the driver asked, eyes on the mirror. "No, take me to County General." He nodded. The cab pulled away from the curb. I looked back once, just once, at the house with its drawn curtains and dark windows, at the porch where no one stood, at the door that didn't open. They'd gone to Bali, packed their bags, boarded a plane, left the country, and left him, alone, sick, unseen. I thought of the transfers I'd made over the years, thousands of dollars, rent, utilities, tuition, emergencies that were always just a phone call away. But no one called me when my father collapsed. No one told me he was fighting to breathe. I had become a paycheck, a distant ATM with a name. In the silence of the cab, I felt something collapse, not dramatically, but permanently. The driver turned onto the main road, the streetlights casting long shadows across my lap. They left him, I whispered, to no one, maybe to myself, and this time, I wouldn't be the quiet one. I stayed silent the entire ride to the hospital. The cab's heater hummed low, but I couldn't feel a bit of warmth. My hands were folded in my lap, gripping the same gift bag I had carried from Seattle, now useless, ridiculous in my lap like a joke I wasn't in on. Outside, Sacramento moved like any city preparing for the holidays, lit storefronts, hurried steps, and a sky already darkening by early evening. I watched it all pass like someone looking out of someone else's life. When we pulled up to County General, I thanked the driver without looking at him, stepped out, and made my way inside. The fluorescent lights hit me first, sharp, sterile, unforgiving. The air smelled of ammonia and recycled anxiety. People sat slouched in chairs, some holding tissues, others holding silence. It was the kind of place where time didn't move, it just existed. I approached the front desk, fingers tightening around the strap of my bag. A nurse with a short bob and a tired smile looked up. "Hi, I'm looking for my father, George Ramos. I was told he was brought in 2 weeks ago." She typed quickly, eyes scanning the screen. Then she frowned. "He's in ICU, 6th floor." She paused. "Are you family?" "I'm his daughter." Her lips pressed together. "No one's been by. Not even once. I'm glad you're here." She handed me a visitor pass, gave me the directions, and buzzed me through. Elevators always seem slower in hospitals. I watched the numbers light up one by one, gripping the pass in my hand like it might anchor me. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into a corridor chilled by too much air conditioning and too little human warmth. Room 623. The hallway felt longer than it should have. Each step heavy, like I was walking towards something I wasn't ready to see. When I pushed the door open, I didn't recognize him at first. The man in the bed had sunken cheeks, pale skin, tubes in his arms, a ventilator feeding breath into him rhythmically. His mouth hung slightly open, a pale band gently tethering one wrist to the side rail. Machines beeped in steady intervals, as if they were the only proof he was still here. I didn't move right away. I just stood there. That was my father. He'd always had this steady presence about him, quiet but sure, the kind of man who didn't say much but made you feel safe just by being nearby. And now, he looked like a ghost someone had forgotten to carry away. I took slow steps toward him, pulled the chair beside the bed, and sat down. My knees nearly gave out as I did. "Dad?" I whispered. Nothing. Just the sound of air pushed in and out of his lungs by a machine that didn't care if he knew I was there or not. I reached out, hesitated, then placed my hand gently over his. His skin felt dry, cool, fragile. "It's me," I said, my voice barely audible. "I'm here." Still nothing. Tears came, not in a rush, but like a slow, stubborn leak. I didn't sob. I didn't shake. I just let them fall. One by one, silent as the man in front of me. I sat there like that for maybe half an hour, maybe longer. Time was irrelevant. Then the nurse from the front desk stepped in quietly. "I didn't want to disturb you," she said gently. But I thought you should know." I looked up. When he was brought in, he was unconscious. We didn't have an emergency contact listed, just a number. We called it a few times, but no one came. I swallowed hard. "Do you remember the number?" She nodded. "It was listed under spouse. We assumed it was his wife, Vera. Of course, my mother had known, and she had done nothing." "How long has he been like this?" I asked. 2 weeks yesterday. A neighbor called 911, said he collapsed outside trying to bring in groceries." "Groceries?" "My father collapsed trying to carry groceries." "Has he said anything?" "No, not since he arrived. He had a mild stroke. That, combined with his age and untreated hypertension. He's stable, but his condition is delicate. If you hadn't come..." Her voice trailed off. She didn't need to finish the sentence. I nodded and thanked her. She gave me a sympathetic glance before stepping out, leaving the door slightly ajar. I turned back to my father, still holding his hand. So they knew. For 2 weeks, my mother, my brother, they knew. They were home. Alive. Well, booking plane tickets, enjoying cocktails with umbrellas in them, posting sun-drenched photos of beachside breakfasts. And they left him here, alone, on a machine. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope of cash I'd brought, the gifts wrapped in red tissue paper. I set them on the windowsill, suddenly unsure what else to do. He didn't need gifts. He needed people. He needed someone to sit here every day and tell him he wasn't forgotten. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No texts. Not a single person had noticed I was in town. Not one family member had tried to check on me. They were probably still in Bali, sipping from hollow coconuts and talking about how much they do for this family. My throat tightened. Not from sadness, but clarity. They'd made their choice. And now, I was making mine. The evening bled into night. Nurses changed shifts. Lights dimmed. The quiet hum of machines kept their rhythm. I didn't move. I stayed by his side, watching the rise and fall of his chest. Not because I thought he'd wake up that night, but because I knew he shouldn't be alone another minute. Somewhere around midnight, I leaned in, brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, and whispered, "You're not going to be alone again, Dad. I promise." By the time the sun rose, I hadn't slept. My back ached from the stiff hospital chair, and my eyes burned from staying open too long. But I didn't care. I wasn't leaving, not yet. I'd promised him that. And if there was one thing I still had control over, it was keeping a promise. The nurse came in just after 6, quietly checking the monitors, scribbling something on a chart. She gave me a soft smile, the kind that says more than words. "I'll be back with his meds," she whispered. When she stepped out, I made my way to the small bathroom just down the hall. I splashed cold water on my face, letting it drip down my neck. My reflection in the mirror startled me. My eyes were swollen, my skin sallow. I looked like someone else. Or maybe I finally looked like the version of me that had always existed beneath the surface, behind the wire transfers and polite phone calls. Back in the room, the machines kept up their rhythm. My father hadn't moved, not even a twitch. His chest rose and fell like a ticking clock, counting down something no one had dared name. I took out my laptop, set it on the tray table, and stared at the screen. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I opened the video call app and hit call under Mom's name. It rang twice before it connected. The background came into view before her face did. Blue sky, palm trees, a glimmering pool. Then there she was, in full color. Sunglasses perched on her forehead, shoulders sun-kissed, a drink in one hand. Music played faintly in the background. It was mid-morning here, but wherever she was, it looked like sunset. "Oh, Maya?" she said, adjusting her glasses. "Is everything okay?" I stared at her. For a second, I couldn't speak. "Did you know?" I asked quietly. She tilted her head, confused. "Know what?" "That Dad's in the hospital, on life support." She blinked. "He didn't want to come with us. You know how he is, always making things more dramatic than they are. He collapsed outside, alone. A neighbor had to call 911. She shrugged. "We all needed a break, Maya. You have no idea the stress I've been under. Keeping everything together, handling your brother, making sure bills are paid. I've been the one paying the bills." The line went quiet. "Mom, he could die. And you're by a pool." "I didn't think it was that serious," she said, sipping her drink. "Your father always had a flair for the tragic." I ended the call before I said something I wouldn't take back. The rage didn't come all at once. It simmered, slow and steady, like water reaching boil. I sat still for several minutes, trying to calm my breathing, but the ache in my chest grew heavier with each beat. I picked up my phone and texted Cassian. "Dad's in ICU. He's been here for 2 weeks. He's not breathing on his own." No reply. I waited 5 minutes. Then I called. He picked up on the fourth ring. Maya, what's going on? Did you know Dad was in the hospital? There was a pause. Yeah, Mom told me. She said he didn't want to come. He's on life support. Okay. And? And? I repeated, incredulous. He could die, Cassian. You're blowing this out of proportion. We're on a getaway. Chill. I didn't even realize I'd stood up until I felt the blood rush to my face. My hands were shaking, my voice on the edge of something I couldn't pull back. You're always so emotional, he said, his tone like a slap. Can you just handle it? I hung up. I walked. I needed air. The walls of the ICU felt like they were caving in. I made my way down the corridor, past reception, and out to the small cafe on the hospital's south lawn. It was chilly, but I didn't care. I ordered a black coffee and sat at the far end of the patio, where no one would bother me. I pulled out my phone and opened the shared family bank account. The balance made my throat tighten. Tens of thousands gone. Airline tickets, resort fees, shopping sprees, all in the last 3 weeks. They were living their best lives. On my dime. I had covered everything for years. Dad's prescriptions, utilities, Cassian's car loan, even the down payment on Mom's kitchen remodel. Every time they asked, I gave without hesitation. Because that's what family does. Because I thought love was measured in sacrifice. But this wasn't sacrifice. This was betrayal. They knew Dad was sick. They left anyway. They used the money I sent for his medications to sip cocktails under foreign skies. My fingers trembled as I hovered over the screen. One small button. Freeze account. No one would be able to withdraw another cent. I tapped it. The confirmation came instantly. The account was locked. I exhaled. Slow, controlled. Then, without thinking, I whispered under my breath, let's see how paradise feels without my paycheck. I didn't expect it to happen so fast. 48 minutes to be exact. That's how long it took after I froze the account. 48 minutes of silence, and then the phone started buzzing. 4 missed calls from Mom, 6 from Cassian, 2 from an international number I didn't recognize, probably the resort manager or maybe some concierge used to kissing entitled guests' feet. The voicemails were urgent, manic even. Maya, something's wrong. My card isn't working. I need you to call the bank. Why are you doing this? We're stranded here. Cassian had to put the hotel on hold with his credit card. Call me back. I didn't call back. I didn't listen to the rest. I just watched the screen light up like a warning beacon, a flashing signal of their unraveling. It was the first time in years that I held something over them, and I wasn't planning to give it up. I walked to the hospital lounge with slow, steady steps. The automatic doors hissed open, letting in a faint breeze from the outside courtyard. Inside, the air was cool and dry, too quiet for the chaos my phone was registering. I found a seat by the window, dropped my bag beside me, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the shared bank account and clicked through the transaction history. The list was endless. Plane tickets to Bali, 3 of them. Spa packages booked under Cassian's name. 5-star dinners, luxury shopping. An odd charge from a jewelry store in San Francisco. Another from an electronics boutique I'd never heard of. All from the family fund. The fund I replenished month after month because someone always had a reason. Dad needed prescriptions. Diana's tuition was late. The electric bill was high. Can you send a bit extra this month, sweetie? Mom would ask. Just until things smooth out. Things had never smoothed out. I was the smoothing agent. I stared at the screen, my jaw clenched tight. That wasn't family money. It was mine. My overtime hours, my skipped vacations, my dinners of ramen and peanut butter sandwiches when I was building savings so they wouldn't have to struggle. And while I sat in fluorescent lighting next to a machine that breathed for my father, they were sipping drinks with umbrellas. I shut the laptop and exhaled. No sound came out, just pressure, slowly released. Back in the ICU, I walked slower than before. My body had adjusted to the weight of knowing they had lied, knowing they had chosen beaches and buffets over hospital visits. I reached my father's bedside, pulled the chair close again, and sat. His eyes were still closed. The same machines whirred, breathed, beeped. I rested my hand on his wrist, just lightly. "I froze it," I whispered. "They're freaking out." He didn't move, but I imagined his mouth twitching in approval, just the smallest hint of a smirk behind the breathing tube, the kind he used to give when a joke had gone too far and only he thought it was funny. I reached for the leather bag I had noticed yesterday under the side table. It was worn, cracked along the edges, with a brass zipper that stuck halfway. Something about it had called to me. I pulled it into my lap and opened it slowly. Inside were papers, medical records, receipts, old notes in my dad's tidy, looping handwriting, a stack of yellowing envelopes bound by a rubber band, and a journal. The leather cover was soft from use. I opened it somewhere near the back and flipped through pages of writing, daily thoughts, some legible, others scribbled and scratched out. His pen had pressed hard against the paper, the words etched with a kind of quiet frustration. Near the final pages, I found it, a single entry, short, clear. "If Maya comes, don't tell her. Let her see with her own eyes." The rest of the page had been torn, carefully, intentionally. I sat there, the journal in my lap, my father's hand still in mine, and stared at that one sentence. He knew. He knew they'd hide the truth from me. He knew I'd come anyway. That sentence didn't feel like a note. It felt like a dare. A challenge to see past the version of the family I'd been sold, and into the one that had grown roots behind my back. A nurse passed by the doorway and peeked in, saw me sitting with the journal, and nodded politely. I closed the book and set it gently back in the bag. "Dad," I whispered, my throat tightening, "you knew they'd hide this from me, but you also knew I'd come." I sat there long after the journal was zipped back into the bag. The daylight had faded, and the artificial glow from the hallway lights cast a yellow sheen across the polished hospital floor. From where I sat, I could hear the faint sound of a child crying somewhere down the corridor, and the beeping of another machine, perhaps in another room where someone else was hoping not to be alone tonight. The buzz of my phone pulled me back into the present. It lit up again. Cassian, then Mom, then a number I didn't recognize. The screen looked like a panic board at an airport gate. Each call, a new gate closing. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I walked out of the ICU wing and headed toward the family waiting area, a room with brown couches and stale coffee, where bad news often waited politely behind curtain calls. I sat down in the corner, plugged my phone into the wall socket, and opened my banking app. The freeze had gone through. Every linked card was now inactive. The account read, "Status, locked, owner access only." I called the bank to confirm. The rep verified everything after a few security questions. "Would you like to re-enable access for other cardholders?" she asked. "No, just me." "Understood. Only you can reactivate it now." I hung up and set the phone on my lap, screen facing up. It vibrated again before I could even put it down. Voicemail from Mom. I played it, partly out of curiosity, partly out of knowing exactly what it would sound like. "Maya, what are you doing? You ungrateful little brat. I gave you life, and this is how you repay me. Your father would be ashamed. I raised you better than this. Fix it, now." I played it again, and again. Each time, the tone hit harder than the words. There wasn't grief in her voice, no concern, no remorse, just indignation, like I had dared to disrupt the image she had worked so hard to paint of our perfect functional family, one where she reigned as the suffering matriarch, Cassian as the loyal firstborn, and I, the wallet that wouldn't shut up. I felt heat climb up my spine. My hands were cold, but inside me, something boiled. That voicemail wasn't a cry for help. It was a weapon, and this time, I wasn't going to let it land. I gathered my things and walked slowly, deliberately, back to Dad's room. The nurses were doing their evening rounds, lowering lights, checking charts. The world was quieter now, the building humming with exhaustion. Inside the room, he was still. Breathing machine still doing its job. That steady, artificial rhythm now felt like a metronome in a rehearsal for grief. I stood beside him and took his hand again. It was dry, rough in the same way it had always been after a day working outside. "Dad," I said softly, "they've turned this into a performance, a vacation bought with lies, but I'm not playing along anymore." I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. The startup tone echoed too loud in the quiet room. I winced, but no one stirred. I opened my email and found the contact for his attorney, Mr. Raymond, an older man I remembered meeting once at a family gathering. He had a face that always looked like it had heard too much truth and learned to keep it anyway. The subject line was simple: urgent, George Ramos. In the message, I wrote exactly what had happened. I detailed Dad's condition, his current state, the financial situation, the absence of his legal next of kin. And I asked for two things: confirmation of any documents Dad might have signed, and guidance on how to protect what was left of his dignity. Before sending it, I reread the final lines. They used him, and now they want to use me. I won't let them, not anymore. I hit send, and sat back in the chair. The machine next to me beeped in its rhythm. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't look. Instead, I whispered, half to Dad, half to the walls, half to whatever part of me had finally stood up tall after all these years. "You want to fight me with guilt, Mother? Then be ready for what guilt can't stop." The next morning, I rose before the sun. I hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out of shallow moments of rest, sitting upright beside my father's hospital bed. The nurse's station outside had dimmed its lights overnight, and now it buzzed quietly back to life with the rustling of clipboards and coffee cups. My phone, sitting on silent mode beside me, lit up with a notification. One new email. The sender: Raymond Law Offices. I clicked it open immediately, my heart hammering hard against my ribs. "Maya, your father left a directive with our office 2 months ago. He specifically instructed us not to act until we were contacted from your number. If you're available today, we'd like to set up a secure video call to go over the contents." I replied without hesitation. Yes, I was available. I'd clear the day. 2 hours later, I sat in a hospital conference room. The window blinds were drawn halfway, allowing in strips of winter light that cut across the wall like slanted knives. I had the laptop propped open in front of me, the bag with Dad's journal beside it, and a black coffee cooling by my elbow. When Mr. Raymond's face appeared on the screen, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and relief. He looked older than I remembered, with deep-set eyes and the kind of calm that only comes from seeing too many families fall apart over things they never thought they'd fight about. "Maya," he began, offering a brief nod. "First, I want to say, I'm sorry you're going through this, and I'm sorry your father isn't able to speak for himself right now. But he did speak, in a way, and he made sure his wishes were on paper." He clicked on something off-screen. A PDF opened on my laptop. I scrolled slowly. It was a notarized amendment to his will, dated just over 8 weeks ago. Maya is to be granted full authority over all medical and financial decisions, should I become incapacitated. Vera and Cassian are to be removed from all powers of attorney, executorship, and estate management. I make this decision with clarity and not under duress. It felt like someone had placed a warm, steadying hand on my back, not because of the authority, but because he'd seen it coming. He had known, he had planned, and he'd chosen me. A lump caught in my throat, not grief this time, not even anger, just the strange kind of recognition that lands in your chest when someone finally tells you they see you, not who you pretend to be for them, but who you've always really been. I didn't know he'd done this," I said. Raymond nodded. "He didn't want anyone to. He was afraid they'd try to contest it or manipulate you before you saw it for yourself." I wiped at my cheek, suddenly aware I was crying. We spent the next 30 minutes going through the next steps: an emergency order to freeze all estate-related financial activity, a petition for temporary conservatorship, and, most daunting of all, a court hearing. Raymond told me I could attend virtually, but I declined. "I'll be there in person," I said. They need to look me in the eye. That afternoon, I walked back into my father's room. The nurses had just finished checking his vitals. One of them gave me a thumbs up before exiting quietly. I sat beside him again, opened the group chat with my mother and brother, and typed one sentence. We're settling this properly, in court. No greetings, no explanations, no apologies, just truth. I didn't wait for a reply. I closed the app, powered off the phone, and leaned back in the chair. He looked so peaceful. The machines hummed steadily. His chest rose and fell like the tide. And this time, for the first time, I didn't feel helpless watching him. I felt like I was finally steering the ship. Later that evening, I hired a private nurse to assist with overnight care. A soft-spoken woman named Lisa, in her mid-40s, who treated my father's condition with the kind of quiet dignity I hadn't seen since this whole ordeal began. I gave her full instructions, walked her through the monitors, and showed her where the journal was kept. He keeps this close, I said, handing it to her. If he wakes up, even for a second, make sure it's in reach. She nodded. Before leaving the room, I returned the journal to the bedside table, laid my hand gently on my father's arm, and whispered, "This time, they'll hear you, through me." I had never seen the inside of a courtroom before. At least not like this, not with my name on the docket, not with my blood relatives seated across from me like we were strangers on opposite sides of a war. 2 days after the attorney filed the emergency petition, I found myself standing in front of Sacramento Family Court, dressed in the plainest black slacks I owned and a simple blazer I hadn't worn since a friend's funeral 3 years ago. It felt like armor now, not decorative, necessary. I walked through the heavy double doors alone. Vera and Cassian were already seated inside, side by side at the plaintiff's table. Vera looked like she'd aged 10 years since our last call. Her makeup was flawless, but her hands fidgeted in her lap. Cassian was chewing the inside of his cheek, a habit he picked up in college when he got nervous during tests. They weren't used to being on the defensive. Their lawyer, a man in an expensive gray suit and a haircut too crisp to trust, gave me a once-over and then looked away. I took my seat across from them and didn't glance in their direction again. The bailiff called the session to order. Judge Eleanor Klein presided, mid-60s, sharp eyes, and the posture of someone who didn't tolerate nonsense. Good. I needed someone like her today. As the hearing opened, Mr. Raymond began by laying out the facts. My father's condition, the timeline of his hospitalization, the lack of family visitation. Then came the financials, detailed records of withdrawals, unauthorized charges, and the breakdown of who had access to the shared account. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, eyes focused only on the judge. Then came Cassian's turn. He stood, buttoned his jacket like he was at a boardroom pitch, and launched into the performance of his life. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "my sister has always been intense. She's had emotional struggles in the past. We've supported her when she lashed out." Mr. Raymond stood immediately. "Objection. Irrelevant, inflammatory, and unsupported." The judge held up a hand. "Mr. Ramos," she said, looking directly at Cassian, "you'll speak only to the facts, and do so respectfully." He sat down, jaw twitching. Raymond handed the judge a printed copy of the email Cassian had sent to our extended family just the day before. In it, Cassian accused me of manipulating Dad's condition to seize control of the family estate, and called me unstable and emotionally dangerous. Judge Klein read the email silently. Her eyes narrowed. Then she set it aside without a word. "Mrs. Ramos," she said, turning to Vera, "do you have anything to say?" Vera stood up, her voice already laced with practiced indignation. "I raised that girl. I carried her for 9 months, paid for her braces, her ballet classes." "Mrs. Ramos," the judge interrupted, "we are not here to discuss ballet. You've been named in financial records linked to tens of thousands of dollars withdrawn from an account intended for your husband's care." Vera opened her mouth, closed it. Outside the courthouse, The world didn't wait. By the time we recessed for lunch, a local reporter had caught wind of the hearing. I spotted her near the stairs, snapping photos of Cassian arguing with Vera on the front steps. He gestured wildly. She turned away, clutching her handbag like it might bite her. Later that night, someone sent me the link. A photo of them, mid-argument, both visibly flustered. The headline read, "Family Feud, Siblings Accused of Robbing Father's Estate While Vacationing." An anonymous Reddit post followed. Rich kids left their dad to die while they flew first class to Bali. Daughter pulls the plug, on their cards. It went viral before dinner. Back inside the courtroom, the mood had changed. The judge reviewed the final documents, my father's notarized amendment, financial records, and confirmation of his current condition. She looked at me. "Ms. Ramos," she said, "based on the evidence provided and the absence of any legal or medical opposition, I'm granting you full conservatorship over your father's medical and financial affairs." I didn't blink. "Vera and Cassian Ramos," she continued, "you are barred from access to any assets or decisions pertaining to Mr. George Ramos without this court's prior approval. Do you understand?" Cassian stared at the floor. Vera crossed her arms and looked straight ahead. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded and stood, collecting my things. Outside, the cold air bit at my face. The courthouse parking lot was half empty. I reached my car, opened the door, and paused as my phone buzzed again. "Incoming call, Vera." I let it ring. The phone rang until it stopped. I stood beside my car in the courthouse parking lot, keys in hand, watching the screen go black. I didn't need to hear whatever Vera had to say. There was nothing left for her to explain, justify, or twist into guilt. That part of our dynamic, the version where I owed them softness after betrayal, had been severed, clean as glass. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing in front of a rented hall tucked behind the local veterans garden. It wasn't grand or overly formal. There were no velvet ropes or gilded podiums, just a simple space, surrounded by old oak trees and winter-dormant grass, with a view of the same Sacramento skyline my father had looked toward each time he took his evening walk. The room inside was quiet, peaceful. A single wooden table at the front displayed a photo of my father in his army dress blues, taken before I was born. Next to it was the framed mission statement of the new foundation I'd formed, the George Ramos Dignity Fund, a nonprofit in his name, built using what remained of the frozen estate, aimed at supporting elderly patients abandoned in hospitals, those whose families had vanished or simply never cared. I didn't need a large board or public applause. I needed something to exist in his name that none of them could erase. I had filed the papers myself, worked with a lawyer to make it legitimate. We posted the announcement online 3 days earlier. The response was overwhelming. People shared their stories. Nurses reached out to volunteer. Donations came in from strangers who didn't know my father, but knew the loneliness of being forgotten. At the small memorial ceremony, only 7 chairs were filled. 2 nurses who had cared for him in ICU, Mr. Raymond, the neighbor who called 911 that night, and one of my father's army buddies from 30 years back. He'd found the post online and drove 3 hours to be there. Not a single member of my family was invited. Still, they came. I saw them from inside, just before I stood up to speak. Vera in a beige suit too thin for the wind. Cassian in a navy coat, hair slicked back like he was walking into a board meeting. They tried to enter, casually at first, as if this were just another public event where their names on a guest list were assumed, expected, but security stopped them. "I'm sorry, you're not on the list," the man said with firm politeness. "We're his family," Vera snapped. "This is our right." "No, ma'am. It's private. Guests only." Cassian tried to argue, but the door was already closing. I didn't look their way when I took the mic. Didn't need to. The people who mattered were already seated. "He never asked for much," I began, steady and clear. "He was the kind of man who found peace in simple routines. Black coffee at sunrise, afternoon walks, Sunday crossword puzzles, and presence. That's what he valued. Not gifts, not extravagance, just presence and dignity." I paused. The weight of that word, dignity, settled in the room like warm light. Today isn't about tragedy. It's about reclaiming something that should never have been taken. The right to be seen. Heard. Remembered. When I stepped down, no one clapped. No one needed to. I walked to the back of the room, where his old jacket hung on a coat rack near the exit. It was the same one he wore on cold mornings, the fabric faded at the elbows, one pocket stitched in a slightly different thread. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a note I had written 2 nights before, after reading the final pages of his journal one more time. I tucked it into the inner pocket of the jacket and patted the seam closed. You were right. I needed to see it myself. But now I see everything. After the ceremony ended, I lingered, watched the others disperse, accepted a few quiet thank yous, a couple of respectful nods. Eventually, I stepped outside into the fading afternoon. The wind had picked up. I walked slowly to my car, unlocking it with a click, then stood for a moment, letting the quiet settle. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Cassian. I didn't open the message immediately. I sat in the car first, turned the engine but didn't pull out. Then I opened it. We've lost everything. Are you happy now? I stared at the screen for a long moment. Typed, paused, deleted, and then I wrote back. You were never mine to lose. The apartment was quieter now. Even the sounds that once kept me company, traffic down on Pine Street, the clicking of my neighbor's heels in the hallway, felt further away. It wasn't silence that filled the space. It was distance, a kind of peaceful detachment that didn't beg to be broken. By the front door hung my father's jacket. I'd brought it back from Sacramento after the ceremony. I didn't launder it, didn't fold it or store it. I just hung it exactly as it was, still carrying the faint scent of his aftershave and the cold air from that final morning under the oak tree. Every time I left for groceries or came back from a walk, I passed it. Never touched it, but never ignored it. It wasn't a monument. It was a presence. Life had taken on a different rhythm. I worked remotely now, consulting in the mornings, managing the foundation in the afternoons. The George Ramos Dignity Fund had already served 8 patients in its first month, providing them with warm clothing, reading glasses, even arranging end-of-life support for one veteran whose family hadn't returned a single call. It gave me purpose, but not escape. Grief, I'd learned, doesn't get quieter. You just build a life around it with thicker walls. That Tuesday morning, after updating our grant spreadsheets and answering a donor's call, I took a break to sort through a week's worth of mail. Mostly junk, a utility bill, a newsletter from a local shelter, and then one envelope with no return address, written in handwriting I recognized instantly. It was Vera's. I opened it slowly, not out of curiosity, but caution. Inside was a single piece of paper, no greeting, no sign-off, just 5 words in her unmistakably elegant cursive. I was wrong. I lost you. There was no apology. Not really. No attempt at contact information, no follow-up plea. Just that. And somehow, it hit harder than any of her shouting voicemails or legal jabs. I sat with it for a while. Then I stood, walked over to the journal still sitting on my bookshelf, the same one I had read beside Dad's hospital bed, and slid the note inside the back cover. No ceremony, no closure. It didn't belong in a trash bin, but it didn't belong on my wall either. Later that week, I visited the garden again. The tree had shed most of its leaves. Its bark was darker now, damp with winter rain. Beneath it, the plaque with Dad's name was still clean, the lettering firm. Someone had placed a laminated card beside the plaque. I bent to read it. You were loved, even when forgotten. There was no signature. No one around, just that message, stuck in the ground with care. I didn't cry. Instead, I sat for a while on the wooden bench nearby, breathing in the damp air and the scent of nearby rosemary bushes. When I got back home, I boiled water for tea and made my way to the kitchen. As I reached for the cabinet, I noticed something new stuck to the fridge, a yellow sticky note, the handwriting mine, but the words had come unprompted, written during a quiet moment the night before. Love loudly, protect quietly, walk away when it's time. I ran my finger along the edge of the paper, then left it where it was. It didn't need to be profound. It just needed to be true. And in that quiet kitchen, next to the jacket that would always be his, I felt something shift. Not a dramatic healing, not a grand release, just a breath, a deep one. One I didn't need to hold anymore. Sometimes, family isn't who shares your blood, it's who shows up when it matters. Maya's story reminds us that love without respect is just manipulation in disguise. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? What would you have done in her place? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life tales that cut deep and speak truth. Your voice matters here. Let's talk in the comments.
Hi, my name's Maria. My sister called me brain dead in front of our entire office. People laughed. No one defended me. What they didn't know? I wasn't just the quiet girl in data. I was married to the man who just bought the company. But that's not even the part that hurt the most. It's what she did years ago. The scholarship I never got. The email I was never supposed to read. The silence my mother still chooses. How do you confront a family that erases you while smiling to your face? And when the truth finally comes out, is it too late to get back what they stole? Let me tell you what really happened. Mondays always started with silence. Not the peaceful kind you enjoy with a warm cup of coffee, but the kind that wraps around your shoulders like a heavy coat you never asked to wear. At 7:42 a.m., I stepped into the elevator of Aurora Creative Inc. on the 17th floor, gripping the strap of my laptop bag and keeping my eyes on the brushed steel wall. I could smell peppermint gum and someone's cologne, overpowering and expensive. Everyone stood just close enough to suggest friendliness, but not enough to make eye contact. That was office intimacy, performative and practiced. Celesta stood in the front, her hair pulled into a bun so precise it looked cruel. She didn't glance back. She never did. Not in the elevator, not in meetings, and certainly not when people asked if I was the new assistant from analytics. I wasn't new. I'd been here 3 years. I built the system they used to track user retention. But I never corrected them. Correcting people in rooms where your sister holds the power feels like playing chess with only pawns. I slipped out the elevator just after her, staying a few paces behind. The office was already humming, screens lighting up, phones buzzing, people greeting each other like they hadn't just seen each other on Slack 10 minutes ago. My desk sat at the far end by the window. Not the view side, just far enough that I could pretend to be part of the view. I unpacked my lunch, chickpea salad in a reusable container, with lemon vinaigrette and a single sprig of mint. No one cared, but it mattered to me. I always believed the little things were where dignity lived when respect was missing. I powered on my laptop. The screen blinked twice before settling into the familiar dashboard. The first email was from Celesta. Subject: Quick favor, message. Can you bring coffee to the strategy room? Use my card at the cafe. Medium roast, oat milk, no sugar, the X. No, please. No, I know you're not my intern. Just the way she always asked. Casually enough to pretend it wasn't a command. I replied, sure. That was all. Not because I didn't have words, but because I'd learned long ago that giving people more than they offer you tends to make them uncomfortable. The walk to the cafe wasn't long, but long enough for 2 junior associates to pass by and not realize I was in earshot. She's like, Celesta's little shadow, one of them whispered, chuckling. Didn't she used to be something in analytics? She's something all right. Celesta's coffee runner. I didn't flinch. I didn't correct them. I just stood in line, bought the coffee, and walked back. By the time I placed the cup on the conference table, Celesta didn't even look up. She nodded, barely, and went back to her slide deck. Her nails were painted a shade of red that made even apologies look calculated. Later that afternoon, I opened the quarterly performance report. I had spent 2 full weeks running regressions, cleaning datasets, building predictive models for user segmentation that ended up shaving nearly $600K off the budget. I scrolled through the document slowly. Strategy team credited, design team credited. Celesta's name appeared 3 times. Mine? Nowhere. Just 1 line in the appendix. Technical support, internal analytics division. I leaned back. My throat tightened, but not in a way I could name. I didn't feel sad. I didn't even feel angry. I felt unlisted, like an uninvited guest to my own contribution. An email pinged. Subject: Fantastic job, Celesta. You're a powerhouse. From HR, I was CC'd. No message. Just a thread of applause that never reached my name. I stood up, walked to the restroom, and closed myself in the last stall. Not to cry, just to breathe. The kind of breath you take when the air around you doesn't recognize you as belonging to it. Back at my desk, I opened a blank document. Typed a single line. Am I invisible, or are they pretending not to see me? I deleted it before saving. Words wouldn't save me in a company built on performance and proximity. Lunch came. I sat at the usual table. Alone. Everyone else huddled around takeout bags and overpriced smoothies. Celesta walked past, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on a sentence that never included me. She paused. Glanced at my lunch. Still the same, she murmured, not unkindly. Not kindly either. I didn't respond. She walked away, and I felt something stir. Not shame, not sadness. Something sharper. By Tuesday morning, the air in the office felt different. Heavier. Like everyone knew something was coming, but no one wanted to say it aloud. Celesta hadn't spoken to me since the day before. She didn't need to. Her silence had always done more damage than her words. At 8:43 a.m., I was finishing a data visualization draft when her message popped up on Slack. Hey, could you speak for 5 mins at the 9 a.m. huddle about the new customer behavior patterns? No deck needed. Just a quick share. No deck, no prep, no prior context. It was already 8:43. And she wanted me to speak, a word she only used when setting people up to fall. Still, I said, sure. I didn't say thank you. That's the thing about me. I used to fill the quiet with gratitude just to keep the temperature down. I wasn't doing that anymore. 9 o'clock came fast. I walked into the main conference room to find nearly every manager and director seated. Even HR was there. The CEO's assistant was tapping her pen like a metronome against her notepad. Celesta stood near the front with her arms folded, the kind of stance that made people think she was in charge even when she wasn't speaking. I noticed she didn't bring her laptop. She wasn't here to lead, she was here to watch. She waved me up with a small gesture, like I was a server refilling her wine glass. Mireya will walk us through some behavioral insights we're tracking, she said. I cleared my throat and stepped forward. There was no screen behind me, just blank glass and the distorted reflection of a woman I barely recognized. I've been tracking a trend in user drop-off during onboarding, I began, hands tightening around the clicker that wasn't connected to anything. It seems to correlate with the timing of email nudges and… Celesta cut me off mid-sentence. Sweetheart, she said, loud enough to freeze the room. This isn't a TED Talk. Are you brain dead? The words didn't land softly. They sliced the air like scissors through paper. There was a pause. Then it came, the snickering. First one, then two. And then it broke out like a nervous fire. Some laughed because they thought they were supposed to. Others because they'd been waiting to see if I'd finally crack. A guy 2 rows back lifted his phone. Not to email, not to check his calendar. He was recording. I stood there blinking. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was trying not to say too much. I could feel the heat rising from my collarbone up to my cheeks. My ears buzzed. My lips parted. I'll follow up with the report later, I said, voice tight. I didn't wait for permission. I walked back to my seat and sank into it, staring straight ahead like I was still presenting. Celesta continued like nothing happened. That was her gift, humiliation disguised as humor. The meeting droned on. I heard none of it. Once it ended, people gathered near the coffee station, chatting like they'd just watched a sitcom rerun. No one looked at me. No one checked if I was okay. I wasn't surprised. I'd learned long ago that silence isn't absence. It's a choice. I made my way to the bathroom. The second stall was empty. I locked the door, sat down, clothes still on, and leaned forward with my arms on my thighs. I wasn't crying, my hands weren't shaking, not yet. I opened my phone. No messages, no emails, no Slack pings asking if I was all right. I started a new email in my drafts folder. Subject, resignation, Mireya Veilbody. Effective immediately. I hovered over the send button, then hit backspace. Slowly, deliberately, line by line until the screen was blank again. That email wasn't for them. It was for me. To prove I still had a way out. That I could choose to leave instead of being pushed. Back at my desk, no one said a word. Celesta walked past around noon, tapping her nails against her phone. She didn't pause. I opened Slack. The thread from the meeting was already pinned. No mention of what happened. No correction. No context. I stared at the message, then minimized it. By 3:10 p.m., I told the office manager I wasn't feeling well and scheduled a ride home. Outside, the weather had shifted. Overcast skies, slick sidewalks, trees shedding their color. Autumn in Minneapolis had a way of making everything look cinematic, even when you felt like the extra. The rideshare driver didn't speak. Just the occasional GPS cue and the sound of tires gliding over wet pavement. I looked out the window at the city I used to love. I wondered if people passing by could tell I'd been embarrassed in a room full of people who wore smiles like shields. I whispered to myself, maybe I am brain dead. Or maybe they've just made me feel that way. I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed, "This is where the story changes." I didn't know how yet, but I knew it had to. By the time I got home, the sky had turned the color of burnt peach, just enough light to see the silhouettes of the trees lining the street. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't check the news. I just kicked off my shoes, walked into the kitchen, and put the kettle on. There was something about the whistling of a kettle in an empty house that made everything feel more honest. You can't pretend to be okay when the only thing breaking the silence is steam. As I waited, I noticed the light above the sink flickering again. That old bulb had been temperamental for months, but tonight it flashed just once, quick and sharp, then held steady. Like it was trying to tell me it remembered too. I leaned on the counter and looked out the window, where leaves swirled like they couldn't decide where to land. And just like that, I was 17 again. Sitting at this same kitchen table, a scholarship letter unopened in front of me. My hands trembling, not from fear, but from hope that for once, just once, someone outside of this house had seen what I could really do. Celesta had walked in that day, wearing her debate blazer, still riding the high of another school award. She hadn't even looked at the envelope. She just said, "Did you check the mailbox for mine?" I remember laughing, nervously. This one's addressed to me. She'd said nothing after that, just hummed a little tune and walked past. I waited 3 days, then a week. But no follow-up email came, no phone call, no congratulations. I didn't know until 2 years later, during a reunion dinner with my old friend Silas, what really happened. He stirred his drink, didn't meet my eyes. I wasn't supposed to say anything, but I held my breath. Not because I feared what came next, but because I already knew. Celesta reached out to the foundation. She told them you struggled under pressure, that you had episodes. Episodes? I repeated, more stunned by the creativity of the lie than the lie itself. She said she was trying to protect you, said the stress would break you. I didn't speak after that. I just nodded and chewed my food until it felt like paper in my mouth. Back in the kitchen now, 15 years later, I poured the hot water over a bag of chamomile and sat in the same chair I had all those years ago. The grain in the wood hadn't changed. The lines in me had. My phone buzzed. Voicemail, Mom. I put the mug down and pressed play. "Mireya, sweetheart," she began in that soft voice she always used when she needed me to be docile. "I heard about the meeting. Your sister's under a lot of pressure. I'm not saying she handled it right, but maybe this isn't the time to stir things. She's up for promotion. You know how hard she's worked. My mouth twisted, but I didn't interrupt. I never did. "You've always been the calmer one," she continued. "The strong one. Please don't make this harder for her than it already is." I deleted the message without finishing it. That wasn't rebellion. It was release. The kind that doesn't come with fanfare or fire. Just a soft closing of a door you won't open again. I walked into my bedroom, pulled out the moleskin journal I hadn't touched in years. It was tucked behind the books I kept but didn't reread. Titles I clung to for identity, not relevance. I opened to a blank page and wrote one line. "When they disappear long enough, you start inventing reasons to make it hurt less." I stared at it. No edits. No second guesses. Then I folded the page back, pressed it flat, and slipped it under my phone. I wasn't sure what I needed it for, but I knew I wasn't done needing it yet. The journal was still on the nightstand the next morning, page folded neat under my phone like a warning I had written to myself. I left it there. By Wednesday afternoon, the office had taken on a strange sort of hush. Not silence exactly, but the kind of quiet that happens when people are pretending they didn't witness something awful. They spoke just loud enough to not be accused of whispering, but never directly to me. I walked into the kitchen, same time I always did, hoping my presence wouldn't register as an event. No one said anything, but I could feel the shift, the way people paused just a breath longer when I entered the room. I grabbed my container from the fridge, sat down at the corner table near the wall, and opened the lid like it mattered. There used to be another chair beside mine. Amy's. That seat was empty now, and this time, it wasn't just vacant. It was deliberately left alone, like no one wanted to be caught taking the place of someone who'd made the mistake of being decent. I took a bite of my salad, but the flavor sat flat on my tongue. I wasn't hungry. I was trying to hold on to routine, like routine could somehow rebuild dignity. That's when my phone buzzed with a Slack message. "Amy." I shouldn't have said anything, it read. I just thought, "You deserved better." Beneath it, a screenshot. Her dismissal notice, formal tone, signature from HR, the kind of language that softens a knife. Intern termination due to disruption of team hierarchy. No names were mentioned, but I knew who'd written it. Celesta didn't need to put her name on things. Her fingerprints were enough. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew if I said anything now, it might make things worse for her. She'd already done what no one else in that office dared. She said something. I closed the message and opened the shared folder where all internal memos were stored. Scrolling through, I found the official announcement. Amy Tollin's internship has ended. We thank her for her contributions. Contributions. That word stuck in my throat like a splinter. What contribution was that? Compassion? The room behind me buzzed with the soft noise of coffee brewing and casual cruelty. Someone laughed too loudly, like they needed to remind the room they weren't aligned with me. I closed my laptop. I needed air, but not outside. Just distance. Walking past the copy room, I overheard two coworkers at the printer. "Why did she even get involved?" one said. The words dropped like gum under a desk. "It's not like she knew her long enough to get personal," the other answered. My steps didn't slow. I didn't spin around and demand decency. I didn't need to. The damage was already done. What mattered now was what I chose to do with it. Back at my desk, I opened the draft of the resignation email I'd been quietly tweaking since Monday. I read it once slowly. Then I hit delete. The decision wasn't dramatic. I didn't whisper, "I'm staying." I just pressed backspace until it was gone. Later that afternoon, I stood in the elevator alone. The glass walls showed my reflection over the city, grayer now, shadowed by clouds that hadn't yet rained. For the first time in days, I looked at myself. Not my clothes, not my posture, not whether my cardigan made me look small, but at my face. I didn't see someone defeated. I saw someone still standing. The elevator reached the ground floor. I didn't step out. Instead, I pressed the button for the 14th floor, the executive wing. If speaking up gets someone fired, Maybe it's time someone stops whispering. The elevator opened on the 14th floor, and I stepped out before I could talk myself out of it. No one stopped me. No one asked why I was up there. That's how silence works in places like this. It covers you just enough to look like permission. I moved past the row of glass offices, my heels quieter than my thoughts. Celesta's door was cracked open. She was on a call, her voice smooth and professional. Absolutely, we'll take the lead on that segment. Yes, I'll send it directly. She didn't see me until I was already inside. She finished her sentence and hung up without looking up. Do you need something? I shut the door behind me. There's a slide in the presentation you're sending to senior leadership, I said, keeping my voice even. Page 3, the predictive model. Celesta leaned back in her chair, finally meeting my eyes. Yes? It's mine. She tilted her head, that familiar false confusion crossing her face. Your name's not on it. Exactly. She offered a tight smile. Are we really doing this? You want to bicker over formatting credits? I took a slow breath. You took my work again. And this isn't about credit. It's about theft. It stops now. Her expression didn't change. Her voice dropped just slightly, lower than polite. You want a war now? With me? You'll lose, Mireya. You've always been softer than you think. I stepped forward, not out of anger, but out of certainty. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to let you know. If you keep signing your name on things that aren't yours, someone will make sure the right names get seen. Celesta crossed her arms. You sound like you've been reading self-help books. No, I said. I've just been quiet long enough to recognize when someone mistakes silence for safety. I left her office before she could answer, the conversation unfinished, but not incomplete. That was the difference now. I didn't need her response. I needed my own boundary. Back at my desk, I opened the presentation. I scrolled to page 3 and stared at the model, mine, unchanged from the Excel sheet I built on a Sunday morning in my pajamas. I copied the file and dragged it into a folder labeled Originals. I didn't create it to prove a point. But now it would. That night, Joran was already home when I walked in, sitting on the couch with his laptop open. The living room was dim, warm with the amber glow of the floor lamp. He didn't ask how my day was. He closed the laptop and just looked at me. I sat down next to him, our shoulders barely touching. After a few minutes, I said, Do you remember the library? He smiled gently. Which one? We practically lived there. The time I helped you prep for your stats exam, the night before your final. He let out a breath of a laugh. You brought a highlighter in 3 colors, made me flashcards, and didn't say a word when I got every single question wrong the first round. I leaned my head back. You told me something that night. You said, You make the world measurable, Mireya, but you never take space in it. His smile faded into something quieter. I didn't mean it as a criticism. I know, I said, but it stuck. He reached over and took my hand, his grip warm, familiar. When you're ready to stop being invisible, just tell me where to stand. There was no sentimentality in his voice, no pity, just a fact, simple as the ticking of the clock above the bookshelf. I nodded, and we didn't say anything else for a long time. Later that night, long after he had gone to bed, I opened my inbox and stared at the anonymous complaint draft I'd been writing since Monday. It detailed what happened in the meeting room, the brain-dead remark, the stolen credit, the intern who was terminated for showing basic decency, all of it. I hovered over send, and then I closed the draft, not because I was letting it go, but because I didn't want to send it anonymously anymore. If I was going to speak, it wouldn't be in whispers. Sometimes, choosing not to whisper is the loudest thing you can do. Friday morning came with a polished edge, sky cloudless, air still, like the city was holding its breath. At 8:57, I sat quietly in the back row of the main conference room, legs crossed, notebook on my lap, pen untouched. Celesta stood at the front, hands perfectly poised on either side of the podium. She was in her element, charismatic, commanding, carefully rehearsed. Her voice echoed off the glass and metal like it belonged to someone who had never been questioned. Today's alignment session, she began, is about culture and accountability. The kind of culture that supports innovation, resilience, and yes, excellence. The word hung in the air, rehearsed and hollow. She clicked to the first slide. Bold text, vague goals, team empowerment, vision-driven collaboration. A collection of safe phrases that meant nothing and said less. The second slide appeared, then the third. I knew that third slide. I'd built it. Every data point, every visual, every label, mine. And under it, her name. She didn't credit anyone else. Not me, not the team, just her. I waited. Slide 5. Something shifted. The screen froze for a second, flickered, then jumped to a different image entirely. A paused video frame. Grainy, slightly tilted. Celesta's face, mid-sentence. Her mouth forming words I knew too well. The room fell still. Not quiet, still, like it couldn't breathe. Then the video played. "This isn't a TED Talk. Are you brain dead?" The audio was clear. My voice followed, barely audible. "I'll follow up with the report." Laughter. The kind that stings because it's real. In the room now, chairs creaked. Someone coughed. No one moved. Celesta looked at the screen, then down at the remote. She clicked. Nothing changed. Clicked again. Still frozen on her face, her voice repeating like an accusation. One more click. Harder. Still nothing. She turned toward the IT manager in the corner. "Kill the feed." He hesitated. "It's embedded, not a live stream." At the back of the room, I stood. All eyes turned. "The clip is real," I said, voice steady. "The context is worse." I walked forward slowly, the only movement in a room full of frozen bodies. "This wasn't a one-time comment," I said. "It wasn't a joke taken out of context. This has been the standard here, for people who don't look the part, who don't speak loud enough, who aren't in the right circle." I stopped in front of the projector. I didn't need the screen anymore. It's a culture, and it ends today. No shouting, no shaking, just a line in the sand, and my name signed under it. After the meeting, I returned to my desk. The air in the office wasn't heavy now. It was sharp. Not because I'd changed, but because I'd made it impossible for everyone else not to. At 1:36 p.m., an email from HR hit the entire company. Subject: internal investigation initiated. Workplace culture review. I opened it. Read it twice. Then closed it and opened my drafts folder. The same complaint I had once considered sending anonymously? No longer needed. Instead, I clicked Compose, attached the clip, typed my full name, and hit send. Not to HR. To the board. By 2:05, I could feel the ripple. People moving differently. Conversations cut short when I walked by. A few stares I didn't meet. At 2:47, a colleague leaned toward my desk, the one who never said a word before. "You just declared war," he said. I looked up from my keyboard. "No, I just stopped playing dead." Later that afternoon, I passed Celesta in the hallway outside HR. Her posture wasn't crisp anymore. Her eyes darted. Her voice had a sharpness that no longer landed. "I need to speak to the board," she said to the HR director. "There's a process," they replied, carefully neutral. Celesta's jaw twitched. "This is absurd. She's manipulating everything. This is personal." I didn't stop walking. I passed her like she was someone I used to know. She didn't see me anymore, not as someone to ignore, but as someone she couldn't erase. I kept walking after passing Celesta in the hallway, my eyes locked on the elevator doors at the far end. She didn't follow, and I didn't look back. Some goodbyes don't need words. They happen in the space between one glance and the absence of another. An hour later, I sat in the smaller of two conference rooms, prepping for a leadership review with senior analytics. It wasn't supposed to be formal, just an overview of upcoming model changes and projected ad spending, But when I opened the shared presentation on the company server, my hands stilled on the trackpad. The formatting was off. The font was different. The structure, gutted. Celesta had gone into the file sometime overnight. She'd stripped the core slides, the core logic, and inserted out-of-date projections with flawed visualizations. Not outright sabotage. No, just enough to make it look like I didn't know my own work. A few minutes later, I walked into the senior leadership meeting, knowing exactly what she'd done, and I chose to present it anyway. The projector glitched 3 times in the first 5 minutes. The graphs didn't match the talking points. The numbers contradicted the previous campaign's performance. I kept going. Celesta sat near the head of the table, arms crossed, tapping her nail on the side of her tumbler. She didn't have to smirk. Her silence did the heavy lifting. When I finished, I didn't apologize. I didn't make excuses. I closed my laptop, thanked everyone for their time, and returned to my desk. By the time I sat down, a new message had popped up in my inbox. From Joren. Subject: Eyes are opening body. Check the thread below, quietly. It was a forwarded email chain from the board of directors. No greetings, no exclamation points. Just a subject line. Leadership Ethics Inquiry. Pending acquisition impact. One director had written, "Should we discuss internal ethics breaches before finalizing the control shift?" Another replied, "Celesta Drine's most recent submission included data plagiarized from the analytics team, attached for review." Then, finally, "We're proceeding with the acquisition, but any unresolved personnel conflicts must be addressed immediately." I stared at the screen. Not with glee, not with revenge in my chest, just relief. They saw it. She hadn't fooled them. At 3:42 p.m., we were called back to the HR floor for a compliance review. No context given. The room was tense when I entered. Executives, HR leads, and someone from the legal team. Before anyone spoke, the door opened one last time. Joren stepped in. Not as my husband, but as the majority stakeholder. He didn't sit next to me. He sat across from Celesta. Her posture faltered. Her breath caught. She looked at him like she was trying to rewrite the past with a glance. But Joren didn't look at her. He looked at the HR lead. "I'm here to observe only," he said, "but I'd like to note for the record, internal ethics concerns have reached my desk. I trust they're being taken seriously." Celesta didn't speak. No one needed her to. After the meeting, I stood near the window in the executive hallway. The skyline stretched beyond the glass, the city blinking like it was winking at me for the first time. HR sent out a company-wide update 2 hours later. Pending further investigation into recent leadership conduct, several department heads will be placed on administrative leave effective immediately. Celesta's name was at the top. I watched her walk out of her office. She wasn't escorted. They didn't need to. The weight of exposure does its own escorting. As she passed by the rest of the team, she caught Deirdre's eye, her most loyal shadow. Deirdre stood. "You told us she was weak," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Turns out she just outlasted you." Celesta turned to me as she reached the elevator. "This was yours, wasn't it?" she asked. I didn't blink. "No," I said. "You built this. I just stopped covering for you." The elevator closed. The fall was hers. The silence was mine, until now. The boardroom lights had been dimmed to a soft glow. The only sound in the room, the quiet rustle of paper as contracts were stacked, initialed, and passed across the table. No more voices, no more defenses, just signatures and consequences. I sat near the far end, next to the assistant general counsel. My role wasn't formal. I wasn't there as an executive or a plaintiff. I was there as a witness. That felt important to me. I didn't come to demand anything. I came to see it finished. Joren stood, tall and understated, in a slate gray blazer and a quiet sort of resolve that didn't need to be loud to be respected. "I'll keep this brief," he said, turning toward the board. "I'm not interested in micromanaging the culture of a company I didn't build. But I won't fund a system that rewards silence and punishes character. Respect isn't a bonus. It's part of the cost. No one said a word. He signed the final document and passed it back to legal. Control of Aurora Creative was his now. Celesta, seated across the table, didn't look up. Her silence wasn't unfamiliar. But this time, it wasn't calculated. It was surrender. HR followed with their own announcement. Effective immediately, Celesta would be placed on administrative leave pending completion of the internal investigation. She offered no objection. Her chair creaked as she pushed back from the table and left the room. I didn't watch her go. Instead, I stood, walked calmly to her office, and paused in the doorway. It was still pristine. No personal photos, no clutter, just the same artificial orchid in the corner and the faint scent of her citrus lotion lingering in the air. I stepped in and laid the envelope on her desk. Handwritten, just a few lines. I stayed silent for years to protect your name. I won't protect what you became. That was it. I left the envelope there and placed a printed copy in HR's file cabinet, not for protection, but so the record would match the truth. On my way back to my desk, the HR manager caught up with me. The board would like to offer you a role in restructuring analytics leadership. I didn't flinch. I appreciate it, I said. But I didn't do this to move up. I did it so no one else has to move out of the way. She looked at me curiously. Is there anything you want? I paused. Yes. Start a task force, something real, with teeth. Ethics, reporting, training. Named after someone no one expected to be strong. The Mireya Initiative? No. I shook my head. The Carter Program. My grandmother taught ESL classes for free out of her garage. She didn't have a title. She just believed everyone deserved to be heard. She nodded, quietly taking a note. We can make that happen. Back at my desk, I pulled out the book I'd been keeping in the drawer. Leadership in Crisis, The Ethics of Action. I'd highlighted a line weeks ago, not knowing I'd come back to it now. Silence doesn't absolve you, it just delays your consequence. I tore the page out gently and left it folded on my keyboard. I packed slowly. No rush, no dramatics. I didn't even take the plant I'd kept on my windowsill, just a framed picture of my grandmother and a thumb drive. In the lobby, I passed by people who had never spoken to me, never learned my name. They didn't say anything now either, but 3 of them stood up. They didn't clap. They didn't smile. They just stood and watched me leave. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need their memory of me to be kind. I just needed it to be accurate. I didn't need them to remember me. I needed them to remember what silence costs. 1 week later, I stood barefoot in my kitchen, the kettle hissing behind me. The hush in the house was different now. No longer heavy, just honest. It didn't press against me like it used to. It simply existed. The cardboard box with my name still sat by the entryway, half unpacked. I hadn't rushed. I hadn't needed to. Leaving didn't mean escaping. It meant I'd finally stopped waiting for someone else to give me permission. I walked to the kitchen table and saw the small envelope that had arrived earlier that morning. No return address, no logo. Just my name, handwritten in simple print. I sat down, peeled it open, and unfolded a single sheet of paper. Mireya. I saw it all and said nothing. I'm sorry. Deirdre. That was it. There was no apology for believing Celesta. No justification. Just that. 4 lines that held more weight than any boardroom statement ever could. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't call her. I didn't write back. But I didn't throw it away either. I stood, walked into the hallway, and slid it into a drawer I'd labeled years ago. Keep, don't forget. That drawer held a handful of things. A copy of my first job offer. A photo of my grandmother teaching English in her garage. A news clipping about the campaign I built but never got credit for. I didn't keep them to dwell. I kept them because I'd learned that memory without context is how people get rewritten. Late that afternoon, sunlight poured in through the living room window, low and golden. I passed by the mantel and paused in front of an old photo. Me and Celesta, maybe 9 and 13, covered in dirt, laughing like girls who hadn't learned yet that even bloodlines carry hierarchy. I picked it up, held it, and after a moment, slid it just behind a half-burned candle. Not out of frame, but not front and center anymore either. That evening, I arrived at a small community center near the edge of Lake Harriet. The sign outside was simple. Back to work. Digital skills for women over 40. Inside, 8 women sat around a scratched wooden table, their laptops open, notebooks ready. Most of them had never worked in tech. A few hadn't worked outside the home in decades. All of them looked slightly unsure they belonged. I smiled and started with the basics: data hygiene, browser extensions, Google Sheets. No one interrupted me. No one called me sweetheart. Halfway through the session, one woman raised her hand. "So, where did you used to work?" I paused for a beat, then smiled. "I was in analytics," I said, "at a place that taught me everything about systems and how they break." She nodded, scribbled something down, and didn't press further. When class ended, they lingered. Some asked questions. Others just thanked me quietly and gathered their things. I packed up slowly, glancing once at the whiteboard before turning off the lights. Outside, the sun had nearly disappeared behind the trees. I tucked my hands into my coat pockets and took the path along the lake, where the breeze stirred just enough to remind me it was almost November. About halfway through my loop, I saw him. Jaren was seated at our usual bench, hands folded, gaze on the water. He looked up as I approached, but didn't speak. I sat beside him. The air between us was comfortable, unhurried. After a few quiet moments, he said, "Does it feel like enough?" I thought about it. The meetings, the letters, the video, the silence, the standing. "No," I said, "but it feels like mine." He nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding. The sky had turned violet and copper, mirrored on the surface of the lake like it, too, had something it was learning to let go of. We didn't say much after that. Some bruises don't fade, but they stop dictating how you walk. And if you're still here, listening, reflecting, then maybe you've walked through a version of this story yourself. Maybe you've been underestimated, overlooked, or told in 100 quiet ways that you didn't belong at the table you helped build. What I've learned is this: you don't always get the apology. You won't always get the audience. But you can always choose how you carry your voice. And sometimes, reclaiming your space doesn't mean shouting. It just means not shrinking anymore. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my name back, my dignity back, my voice. And I got it. Not because someone handed it to me, but because I stopped whispering. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever stayed silent just to keep the peace, and later realized it only protected the wrong person? Or maybe you were the one who watched in silence, unsure whether to speak. Either way, your story matters. Your turning point may not look like mine, but it's real, and it's yours to tell when you're ready. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever been in Mireya's shoes, or Deirdre's? If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments, or just tell me where you're watching from. I truly want to hear from you. If you didn't connect with the story, tell me why. What would have made it hit closer to home? Feedback helps me grow, and I'm here to listen. And finally, if you believe in the power of quiet strength, in stories that honor dignity over drama, please consider subscribing to this channel. Your voice, your presence, it's what keeps these stories alive. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Until then, stay grounded, stay kind, and never mistake silence for surrender. Hi, I'm Catelyn. They used to call me the family failure. Not in private, but into a microphone during a toast. A room full of people clapped while my sister smiled like it was a joke. But the man she planned to marry? He turned to me and said, "Thank you," because I was the one who paid for the venue. The one who built the company he worked for. The one she never mentioned. She left my name off the program, off the slideshow, off the list. But why did she erase me? While living in my home, using my money, wearing my clothes? Was I really the failure? Or just the part of her story she couldn't control? And if I never said a word, how did the truth get so loud? They didn't look up when I walked in. Not one face turned toward me, not even a flicker of recognition. I stood for a moment just inside the gate, hands loosely folded in front of me, watching laughter bounce off plastic chairs and paper plates, stacked with deviled eggs and store-bought pie. The Carmody family reunion brunch, third Sunday of May, rain or shine. And I was invisible. Delilah was perched on a patio stool, legs crossed, drink in hand, talking to a woman in a cobalt dress with a southern drawl thick as molasses. I heard her giggle, effortless, polished. Then the woman asked, "So, did your sister make it?" Delilah didn't miss a beat. "Oh, it's just me today," she said, her voice light, keeping it simple. I looked down at the lemon bars I'd baked the night before, no box mix, and walked them to the folding table near the edge of the yard. I slid them between a tray of Costco pinwheels and some sad-looking celery sticks. No one noticed. Not even Aunt Sharon, who once told me lemon reminded her of her first kiss behind the church after choir practice. I poured myself a weak iced tea, skipped the sugar, and found an empty lawn chair in the shade. The sun was relentless on the others, but no one joined me. I didn't expect them to. The conversations kept circling around Delilah. Her wedding plans, her designer, her bachelorette trip to Aspen. She floated through the backyard like a well-rehearsed hostess, never needing to stop and listen because the story was always about her. That was her gift, shaping a moment around herself so tightly there wasn't space left for anyone else. Across the lawn, a man in khakis and boat shoes approached her. "I heard you have a sister. She's in consulting?" he asked. Delilah tilted her head like she was pondering a grocery list. "I mean, I had a sister who did odd jobs. Data something. Freelance, I think. Nothing serious." Someone at the table laughed and muttered, "Every family has a wild card." They laughed harder at that one. No one looked my way. I lifted my glass, took a small sip, and let the ice clink quietly. I wasn't angry. Not really. That would have implied I expected different. What I felt was older than anger, closer to that dull ache you get when you've been sitting wrong too long and your body forgets comfort was ever an option. I remembered the time I paid off our cousin Joe's mortgage after he lost his job. Quietly, no paper trail. They held a backyard BBQ in his honor a month later. Delilah gave a speech. She thanked everyone who pitched in. My name never came up. I remembered when Delilah moved into my condo for a month or two after her PR firm folded. That was 11 months ago. She still had my spare key, still used my guest towels. But in this yard, in this story, I didn't exist. From my seat beneath the tree, I watched Everett, her fiancé, flip burgers beside Uncle Rich. He seemed decent, kind eyes, clean laugh. He didn't know, not yet. 3 months ago, Delilah had asked for help covering the deposit on her venue. "Just until my refund from the planner comes in," she'd said, breezy and confident. I transferred the funds that afternoon, quietly, no questions, no conditions. I signed the check with my business name, R. Cruz Consulting. She didn't ask what the R stood for. She never has. Back in the present, I noticed the ring on her finger catching the sunlight as she adjusted her hair. Everett leaned over and whispered something into her ear. She beamed like she invented joy. I took a slow breath. That man raising a toast with her smile doesn't know I built the stage they're standing on. Everett raised his glass, smiling like he had everything figured out. I let mine sit untouched, the condensation dripping slowly along the sides, as if even the glass knew not to try too hard to be seen. Later that night, I slipped off my shoes at the door and stepped into my condo. The quiet was a relief. The kind you only get after you've held your breath through a whole afternoon without even noticing. I padded into the kitchen, dropped my keys in the bowl near the sink, and spotted two strangers at the island bar, laughing with Delilah like old friends. "Catelyn, you're back!" she sang out, still in her silk robe, hair in loose waves like she'd just walked off a set. "We were just finishing the last of that cab you brought back from Napa. Hope that's okay." It wasn't a question. One of the men turned. "Oh, you must be her roommate," he said, eyes still on Delilah. "You guys have a great place." She smiled. "We make it work. She's between contracts right now, trying to find her next step." That word, between, hung in the air like a flicked knife. Deliberate, surgical, unnecessary. I didn't correct her. I just walked past the empty bottle, grabbed a can of sparkling water, and retreated to my room. I closed the door quietly behind me and sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the cold aluminum like it might keep me from saying what I wouldn't take back. It was always like this. Public play, private silence. She knew the truth, that I owned the apartment, that I ran a firm with international clients, that the wine she poured had been charged to my business card without asking. But the game was always better when you could convince others they were watching a rising star and her shadow, not the other way around. An hour or so later, I headed back out to grab something from the laundry and crossed paths with Ms. Hensley, the older woman who cleaned the floor twice a week. Her back was slightly bent, but she always stood tall when she spoke. "Your sister's got such good taste," she said warmly, nodding toward the front door. "She's lucky to live in a place like this." I opened my mouth, then closed it. It wasn't worth it. I just smiled. "She is," I said. I walked past her, rounded the corner, and leaned against the hallway wall for a moment. That line, "she's lucky," stuck with me. Not because Ms. Hensley was wrong, but because she was right. Delilah was lucky. She had a good address, matching furniture, and a sister who kept her mouth shut. That was worth more than square footage. After the guests left and the lights dimmed, I sat at the kitchen counter with my laptop open. Lease agreement, property taxes, utility accounts. Everything was in my name. She'd never even chipped in for toilet paper, much less rent. I clicked over to my banking app, saw another charge from Instacart. 2 bottles of imported wine, $76. Charged to the shared card. My card, no text, no note. She had been supposed to stay for a month, to regroup after losing her job. It had been 11 months. I leaned back, staring at the screen, and thought about all the things I didn't say. The moments I let slide. The times I bit my tongue so hard it bruised my own sense of self. The next morning, I woke up early. No reason, just couldn't sleep. I brewed coffee, poured 1 cup, and left a note on the fridge. Plain white paper, neat handwriting. "Monthly contributions are due by the 5th. Let me know if you need the Zelle info." That was it. No smiley face, no signature. Just a small, quiet line in the sand. She came into the kitchen around 10, yawning, stretching like a cat who owned the place. She read the note, blinked once, then turned to me and grinned. "Well," she said, voice sugar slick, "somebody woke up with a business hat on." I didn't respond. She smirked, pulled open the fridge, and grabbed a peach. "You know, Kat, not everything's about invoices and line items." I watched her leave the room, still chewing, like nothing had shifted. But it had. After she walked away from the fridge with that smug little grin, I sat back down at my desk and opened my laptop. Not to work, but to breathe. The kind of breathing that slows you down before you say something that burns bridges with gasoline. I didn't need that. I just needed space. 3 days passed without much exchange between us, which was a mercy. Then, out of nowhere, Everett popped into my office between meetings. "You know, we're doing the final walkthrough Friday," he said, half spinning the chair beside me. "You should come by the venue, see how it all turned out. You helped pull this off." I looked at him over my glasses. "I don't think I'm on the guest list," he chuckled. "Stop. You're practically the reason it's happening." I didn't push it. There was no point. I knew Delilah hadn't mentioned me. She never did. Not in public, not when it counted. I just nodded and murmured, "I'll think about it." That Friday, I showed up. Quietly. No RSVP. No one stopped me at the door. The rooftop was stunning, strings of soft lights crisscrossing overhead, a spread of catered dishes laid out like an art exhibit, and jazz humming from hidden speakers. I wore a simple black dress, clean lines, nothing flashy. I walked in, poured myself a glass of champagne, and stood by the railing as the sun dipped behind the skyline. People were talking, old classmates, family friends, clients Delilah once advised. But I had cleaned up after. A few recognized me from business articles, offered polite smiles. Most didn't know me at all. That was fine. Delilah saw me about 20 minutes in. Her eyes widened like she'd seen a ghost. She mouthed something I didn't bother decoding, some version of, "Why are you here?" I raised my glass slightly and turned away. She didn't approach. An hour later, she clinked her glass. A hush fell. She stepped onto the small platform near the garden wall, wearing a deep burgundy gown and that spotlight-ready smile. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "This day means everything to Everett and me, and I just want to take a moment to recognize those who've helped us become who we are." She listed names, family members, former mentors, her favorite yoga instructor. Then, her tone changed. "And to those who didn't always understand the path I was on, thank you too. You reminded me what I didn't want to become. Failure teaches, if we're smart enough to learn. Some of us learn quicker than others." The laughter was soft, polite. No one looked at me, but I felt the air shift. She glanced in my direction. Barely. Like I was just part of the furniture. I stood there, still. I didn't blink. I didn't shift my weight or look away. I just sipped my drink, slow and steady, and waited for her to finish. When the music returned, people clapped and resumed chatting like nothing had happened. Everett made his way toward me, weaving through the crowd. He handed me a fresh drink and said gently, "That part about failure, she wasn't talking about you, right?" I let a beat pass. "I didn't realize I was famous enough to be a metaphor," I said, letting the corner of my mouth curl, just slightly. He looked down at his glass. "She shouldn't have said that." "She said exactly what she meant to say," I replied. I turned and looked out over the skyline. My name was never going to be mentioned, not in her speeches, not on her invitations, not on the plaque outside that venue. But I was there. I had built pieces of this night that she couldn't erase, even if she tried. There are moments where silence keeps you safe, keeps things from exploding, keeps you from becoming the villain in someone else's story. But that kind of safety starts to feel like surrender, and I wasn't sure I wanted to be quiet anymore. The wind had picked up that evening after the toast. I stood for a long moment by the railing, glass still in hand, as people moved on with drinks and small talk like nothing had just been said. By the time I got back to my car, the air felt heavier than before. Charlotte's kind of humid, like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. 2 hours before that, I had walked into the venue's lobby and politely gave my name to the young woman at the check-in table. She scrolled through her tablet, then looked back up. "I'm sorry," she said, forcing a professional smile. "I don't see you on the list. Are you with one of the vendors?" "No," I answered calmly, pulling a folded piece of paper from my clutch. "I'm not on the guest list, but I paid the deposit." She hesitated, scanned the document, receipt, contract, wire details. Her eyes flicked to the signature, R. Cruz. "Ah, right. Of course. Please come in. I'll make a note." She didn't look me in the eye after that. I didn't take it personally. Once inside, I walked past a long table, dressed in white linens and adorned with silver-framed thank you cards. "Special thanks to our sponsors," one banner read. At the top, in bold font, the Carmody Keene Foundation. I blinked. There was no foundation. It was something Delilah had invented to look official. A shell name, backdated with a logo she probably made in Canva. I scanned the names below. Businesses, a boutique gym she used to work with. Not one mention of R. Cruz Consulting. Not even small print. Not a single syllable. I stepped to the side, opened my phone, and pulled up the confirmation email from the venue. The receipt, the account transfer, the initials. It was all there. I'd kept it organized, not because I needed credit, but because credit was how you tracked what you had lost. She didn't just erase me, she replaced me, with a fiction that looked better on paper. Back at the condo, 2 weeks before the event, I had received a letter. Real envelope, stamped, handwritten. It came from a shelter I had donated to privately the month prior, after they reached out during a funding emergency. Delilah had been the one to grab the mail that morning. I hadn't thought twice about it. That evening, I saw the envelope, opened, wrinkled, tossed in the trash under a pizza box. I pulled it out. The letter inside was short but sincere. Your generosity helped keep 27 women safe this month. Thank you for believing in second chances. No signature, no public shout-out. Just paper. Honest paper. She never said a word about it. I never asked. The morning after the party, I came home early. I didn't expect to see her up yet, but there she was, sprawled across the sectional in leggings and a hoodie, phone in hand, scrolling. The smell of lavender body spray still clung to the hallway. "Morning," she said, eyes never leaving her screen. I walked past her, straight into my office, shut the door, sat down. There was no need for confrontation. I had no interest in another performance. I logged into my accounting software and created a new folder, Household. Inside it, I opened a blank invoice. Line item, guest rent, utilities, grocery reimbursement. Client, Delilah Carmody. Payment terms, due the 5th of each month. Delivery, Zelle or check. I hit Save as Recurring, leaned back, and stared at the screen. If she wanted to treat this like a partnership, we'd do it the right way. From here on out, every cost would come with a receipt. I heard her laugh from the living room, loud and fake, likely some reality show echoing off the walls. But I didn't feel like correcting anything anymore. It wasn't that I wanted distance, it was that I no longer wanted distortion. And people like Delilah thrived on distortion. They needed a flexible version of truth they could sculpt to fit their stories. Mine had bones. Mine held weight. That morning, as she left to run errands in my car, I watched from the window. Then I opened my email and began drafting a lease agreement with her name on it. We were going to do this by the book. After sending that lease draft, I closed my laptop, got dressed for work, and took the long way to the office. I didn't want to arrive before Everett. I wanted to walk in right after him, not out of strategy, but because I was tired of being early for people who never noticed. We hadn't spoken since the party. His texts were brief, mostly logistics, no emojis, no, "Hey, how are you?" I didn't expect much, but I could feel the shift. Something about the way he had looked at me that night, glass in hand, jaw clenched. He wasn't just embarrassed, he was questioning everything. By mid-morning, we had our usual Monday strategy touch point. He walked in holding 2 coffees, set one on my desk without a word, and sat across from me. I opened the quarterly projections. We got through the first few agenda items like nothing was different. He was focused, but less performative than usual, like he wasn't trying to impress anymore. Then he saw it. He flipped to the next slide and froze, eyes locked on the signature line at the bottom of a pitch deck I'd finalized over the weekend. R. Cruz, founder, R. Curve Strategies. He blinked. Wait, that's you? That's... I looked up slowly. Yes? He leaned back. I didn't realize that's what the R stood for. No one ever asks. He let out a quiet exhale, almost a laugh, the kind you use when something suddenly clicks and you're not sure if you feel enlightened or stupid. So, I've been working for the family failure. You've been working with her, I corrected. There's a difference. He didn't smile, but he nodded. A few minutes passed before either of us spoke again. Then he cleared his throat and said, "That time you helped me recover that DEI account, remember how I was about to pull the whole proposal?" I nodded once. "Well, your feedback saved it." That account pays half my team's salaries now. I've told that story to 5 other execs, but I told it like it was my idea. I didn't respond. He looked down, almost embarrassed. Why didn't you ever tell anyone about who you are, what you do? Because nobody ever listened when I wasn't holding a microphone. He nodded again, slower this time. I saw it land. The next afternoon, Everett sat in on the final video review with the production company that had handled the party. I wasn't there, but Tilda, the lead editor, messaged me later with something odd. "Hey," she wrote, "this might be nothing, but Everett got weird when he saw a spot was missing in the slideshow. Thought you should know." When I followed up, she called me directly. "Okay, so, you remember that baby photo? The one of Delilah in the kitchen, with you in the background, both covered in flour?" I did. I hated that photo, but Mom had loved it. It used to sit on her piano. Well, it was in the first draft of the slideshow. Everett saw it, liked it. But a day before final delivery, Delilah said it didn't match the aesthetic and told us to remove it. She didn't say it was you in the photo, just that it cluttered the visual flow. Of course she did. That night, back home, I sat on the balcony with my laptop on my knees. The city buzzed beneath me like a distant engine, white noise for a brain that wouldn't turn off. I pulled up my text thread with Delilah. Then I typed, "Don't speak for me again, especially not on a stage you didn't pay for." She replied 20 minutes later with a laughing gif, the kind that winks like it's in on some secret you'll never be part of. I didn't respond. Instead, I stared at the message and thought about how long I'd let her run the show. Let her craft the narrative. Let her cut pieces out of my life, photos, names, facts, because they didn't match the version she wanted to present. Some people confuse quiet with weakness. They think it means you're retreating, but retreat isn't surrender. Sometimes it's preparation. And I was done being the ghost in her success story. By Monday afternoon, the weight in my chest had settled into something sharper. Not grief, not anger, just clarity. I'd moved past waiting, past hoping. Now I was observing, collecting, filing it all like evidence in a case I didn't need to argue. Not anymore. That Sunday, while sipping coffee at my desk, I was reviewing engagement metrics for a marketing client when something odd caught my eye. A sponsored post from a new account had gone semi-viral overnight. The profile photo was generic, just a cropped image of pink tulips. But the caption? "Delilah Carmody is the kind of woman other women aspire to be. Grace under pressure, vision beyond the ordinary." Watching her lead was the highlight of my year. My jaw tightened. It was written like a press release. The hashtags were even more precise. Leadership goals, unstoppable bride, cheer power moves. I switched tabs, ran a quick IP trace through our analytics software. It wasn't advanced surveillance. It was just a tool we used to flag bot accounts and track influencer campaigns. The post had been written from our apartment, from my Wi-Fi. She wrote her own tribute. To herself. I leaned back in my chair. No surprise. Just confirmation. I should have felt disgusted, but mostly what I felt was sad. For both of us. That she needed to be admired so badly, she was willing to manufacture it, and that I had once tried to earn that admiration for real. I didn't bring it up. I let it sit. That night, around 11:15, I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed on the counter. A long text preview appeared. It was from Delilah. Not to me. At least, not intentionally. "Once this wedding's over, she's gone. I'm done pretending she's useful. Tired of babying her ego. It's time she learns how to fend for herself." No emoji. No punctuation. Just cold. I stared at it for a moment. Then I wiped my hands, opened the message, and hit forward. Recipient: Everett Keene. No comment. No explanation. Just the raw text, delivered as is. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed. The next morning, the sun came in early and strong. I padded into the kitchen, brewed a pot of coffee, and waited. Delilah eventually appeared in her usual athleisure, messy bun, yoga pants, smug aura. "Did you finish the almond milk?" she asked, opening the fridge. "I did," she shrugged. "You could have picked some up." I poured my coffee, sat at the counter, and finally looked at her. "The thing about pretending someone's useless," I said quietly, "is you'd better hope they never stop being useful to you." She blinked, caught off guard, then laughed like she always did when she didn't have a real answer. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said, still calm. "I'm being done." I left the room. She didn't follow. Later that day, Everett knocked gently on the frame of my office door. No meeting scheduled, no pretext. Just him, looking like a man who had finally stopped doubting his instincts. He walked in, sat down, and folded his hands in his lap. "She never told me you were sisters," he said quietly. I didn't reply. "She told people she built this life, that she created something from nothing, that you were a distant relative, not who you are." I exhaled slowly. "She created the story. I just paid the invoice." He nodded. "You've been helping her this whole time, haven't you?" "She's been standing on ground," I poured, "but she never once looked down." There was silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was acknowledgement. A moment where the room adjusted its shape, not to make me bigger, but to make the truth visible. He looked at me, eyes clear now. "You should be the one speaking next weekend, not her." I tilted my head slightly. "What makes you think I want the mic?" "Because you're the one who earned it." I didn't answer him right away. I just leaned back in my chair and looked at him, really looked at him. Not as my sister's fiancé, not as my employee, but as a man who had finally learned how to sit with the truth. By the end of the week, I got the email confirming my place on the agenda. The subject line was bland. Speaker confirmation, culture and integrity panel, but the name next to mine wasn't. It was hers, Delilah Carmody. Still listed as co-host. Saturday came too fast. I'd ironed my blouse twice, not because it needed it, but because I didn't want to look like I'd tried too hard. I arrived 15 minutes early, walked past the valet, past the branded welcome wall, and into the sleek, glass-walled lobby of Everett's firm like I'd been there all my life. Because I had, just never from the front entrance. The room was buzzing with executives and clients. I took my seat at a round table near the front, half listening to opening remarks, until Everett stood up. He straightened his blazer, tapped the mic gently, and began. "Leadership," he said, "isn't just about showing up when the cameras are rolling. It's about the people who hold things together before anyone's watching." He thanked the board, the team, even the interns. Then his voice dropped just slightly. "And most of all," he continued, "to the woman who shaped how I lead, how I listen, and how I choose to grow, Caitlin Cruz." The room paused. Actual, honest silence. She's the one who made this platform possible. She's the one who reminded me that real builders rarely take the stage. But they should. People clapped. Not out of obligation, not politely. It felt earned. Across the room, Delilah was frozen in place. She clapped too, 2 beats late. Her mouth smiled, but her eyes didn't. After the panel, during the cocktail hour, people started approaching me. Strangers, senior partners. A woman in a navy wrap dress from New York came up first. "So, tell me," she said, swirling her drink, "why weren't you listed as co-host for the engagement event? I heard you funded most of it." I blinked. "I did," I said simply. She laughed gently, not unkind. "Well, that's a narrative adjustment waiting to happen." Another voice chimed in. A man from Boston I'd met once at a tech summit. "Didn't you also design that Q3 rollout Everett keeps bragging about?" Before I could answer, someone else leaned in. "She's always been quiet, but you know what they say. It's the quiet ones who run the room." Delilah was nearby, trying to insert herself into other conversations, her laugh louder than necessary, eyes darting like she was trying to track too many things at once. "She's very private," she finally offered when someone asked about me. Not into attention. But by then, the room had shifted. Eyes turned when I spoke. People nodded when I made a point. The story she had crafted for years was crumbling under its own weight. Later that evening, just outside the coat check, she caught me in the hallway. "We need to talk," she said, brushing past a couple waiting for their Uber. I didn't flinch. "No, Delilah, we don't." She grabbed my arm lightly. "You blindsided me." "This isn't my fight anymore," I replied. "The truth is, doing just fine without me." Her jaw clenched. "I'm going to clarify everything, set the record straight." "Then start," I said, meeting her gaze. "Start by telling them who paid the florist." She blinked. Just once, then let go. The next morning, I walked into the office early. The cleaning crew was still finishing up, vacuum humming low in the hallway. I stopped outside the boardroom. There, freshly mounted, was a new brass nameplate, Catlin Cruz, Executive Advisor to Global Strategy. It wasn't loud, it wasn't spotlighted, but it was solid, permanent. I stepped inside, flipped through the minutes from last quarter, and marked a few corrections. They were finally saying my name. But I had stopped waiting to hear it. By that Friday night, the story had traveled without me. I didn't need to correct anything, didn't need to press send. It was already unraveling, thread by careful thread. I found out about the engagement ending, not from Delilah, but from Everett, through a brief, formal, company-wide notice that stated he would no longer be moving forward with personal obligations previously announced. Polished. Vague. But if you knew, you knew. The part he didn't say publicly came in a text that simply read, "You were right. I should have seen it sooner." I didn't reply. Later that evening, while reviewing a vendor contract at home, I heard the unmistakable thud of her keys hitting the entryway table. She hadn't texted to say she was coming back, just walked in like nothing had shifted, like she still had a right to the quiet air between our walls. "You won," she said flatly, setting her bag on the chair. "I wasn't playing," I answered, eyes still on the document. "You cost me everything." "No," I said, meeting her gaze now. "You gave it up the moment you thought the illusion was more valuable than the truth." She left again, slamming the door, not for dramatic effect, but because even she knew there was no clever line left to deliver. The following Monday, IT flagged an internal concern during a routine compliance audit. An email had been sent from my credentials to one of our largest clients nearly 6 months prior, declining a renewal. A $200,000 account lost. I reviewed the logs in silence. The timestamp, the device ID, the location metadata. It wasn't just a mistake. It was done from our apartment, from her laptop. When I was in New York at a speaking engagement, I said nothing, no HR report, no confrontation. I scheduled a call with the client, apologized for the miscommunication, sent a revised proposal within 24 hours. I CC'd Everett, finance, legal, all professional, all traceable. Then, I walked into the boardroom that Thursday morning, mid-quarter review already underway, and opened the backup documentation. "This," I said calmly, "is how we lost Dervon and Briggs. It won't happen again." No one argued. They just nodded. That evening, I returned home early. The building was quiet, early dusk settling over the skyline. I walked down the hallway, badge still warm in my hand from the office scan. As I approached our unit, I saw the keycard reader blink red. She was standing there, confused, jiggling the card like it might just be a tech glitch. I stepped around her, unlocked the door with my code, held it open. "You locked me out," she said, voice cracking for the first time in a long while. "No," I said simply. "I ended the lease. You didn't sign the new one." She stared at me, arms crossed tight against her chest. "I paid for your silence longer than I should have," I added. "Now it's time to earn your own voice." Behind the door sat a single duffel bag, packed neatly. Nothing spiteful, just final. She stepped inside, grabbed the handle, and turned back. I was trying to protect us. No, I said softly. You were trying to preserve the version of you that didn't need me. But you always did. I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. 2 days later, I was back in my office early, finishing prep for our expansion review with the European partner group. I had already archived the last financial document tied to her name, closed the tab, unlinked the account. The past wasn't gone. It was just no longer open. When my team arrived, I stood and greeted them with the kind of ease that comes from clarity, not control. We're pivoting, I told them. New structure, same standards. Let's move forward. The room nodded. I glanced at my screen one last time before the call began. Some exits don't need doors slamming, just a quiet click, a decision, and no need to revisit it again. 3 years passed, not all at once, not in leaps or milestones, just slowly, steadily, like rain that erodes stone without ever announcing its presence. It passed in breaths, meetings, emails, and the way silence settles into your life after you stop trying to explain yourself to people who never really listened. I didn't plan to arrive where I am. Not exactly. But I'd built it, piece by piece, after everything burned down. Not in anger, just in necessity. When you're done fighting for recognition that won't come, you start building your own platform. Something that doesn't need applause to stand. Something that holds others up, too. That morning, I had just finished speaking at the Industry Leadership Forum in Boston, a room full of power suits and polished shoes, the kind of place that used to terrify me. Now, it didn't. Now, I owned my space in it. The applause I received wasn't thunderous, but it was real. Not performative, not obligatory. I'd learned to tell the difference, and to value the kind that didn't need to shout to mean something. Backstage, someone pressed a bottle of water into my hand, murmured something about a media photo. I nodded, already half turned to leave, when I caught a glimpse, just a flicker, of movement near the far wall. She stood there. Delilah. No entourage, no crowd. Just her. She wore a visitor badge around her neck, the kind they give to Pulse Ones and quiet observers. She didn't smile, didn't call out. Just watched me like she wasn't sure if she had the right to, and for a heartbeat, I thought she might turn away. But she didn't. She didn't say anything at the event, didn't make a scene. She simply disappeared as the crowd filtered out. I didn't ask around, I didn't look for her. But that afternoon, I found her, seated alone at the Terrace Cafe behind the hotel. Not the main one, the showy lobby cafe full of glass and marble. No. She was at the little garden cafe, the one you had to know existed to find, the one surrounded by hedges and half-forgotten orchids. She'd remembered it, or maybe she'd just hoped I would. When I walked up, she looked up briefly. 10 minutes, she said. That's all I'm asking. I sat without speaking. She didn't waste time, didn't soften her voice or decorate her words. I wasn't well, she said. Back then. I told myself I was protecting our family name, holding the line. But really, I think I was just afraid. Afraid of what people would think if they knew how much I leaned on you. How much of me only stood because you were holding the weight. She paused. No tears, no theatrics, just truth spoken like a stone finally laid down after being carried too long. I can't fix it, she added. I know that. But I'm sorry. For what I said, for how I made you feel, for all of it. I let the moment stretch. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I'd let that go a long time ago. I was simply still. Solid in a way I hadn't been when I used to chase her approval like a dog chasing headlights. Apologies don't always fix things, I said. But I respect that you showed up, and that you didn't come here asking for anything back. She nodded. Not in defeat. In understanding. There's a difference. When we stood to leave, she lingered. Took half a step forward, shoulders tensing as if for a hug. I didn't move. I don't hate you, I said gently, but I can't build from where we broke. She stepped back, arms falling quietly to her sides. That's fair, she said. We didn't say goodbye. We just left. Two women who once knew how to tear each other down with silence, now choosing a different kind of quiet. The kind that didn't need winners or apologies etched in stone. That night, back in my hotel suite, I stood at the window. The Boston skyline stretched out like a circuit board made of light. One of the buildings across the river had the glowing logo of my consulting firm. My name, my work, lit in soft lines against steel and glass. No champagne, no spotlight, but it was enough. A soft ping from my laptop broke the silence. Subject: Thank you from Kara Ellis, founder, Rise Up Analytics. She'd been in the audience. I remembered her face, bright, focused, taking notes like the future depended on them. Maybe it did. Just wanted to say thank you, her email read, for making room for people like me, for showing there's more than one way to be powerful. I stared at the words for a long moment before typing. We don't wait for room, Kara, I wrote. We build it. Then I hit send. Outside, the city thrummed. People moving through subway tunnels, hotel lobbies, airport gates, rushing through doors, carrying versions of themselves they'd stitched together from heartbreak and ambition. I thought about how many times I'd been called the family failure. How many rooms I'd entered knowing someone was waiting to see me fall, but I didn't fall, because some of us aren't meant to be the crown. We're meant to be the foundation, and foundations don't demand attention. They don't beg to be loved. They carry everything else, quietly, relentlessly, and with more strength than anyone sees. Justice wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about payback. It was this moment, being able to walk away, whole, without needing to be seen, without needing to look back.